Welcome to Seat at the Table, where we believe your technical skills will get you in the room, but your soft skills and business acumen will earn you a seat at the table. My name is Jerich Beason, and I am the host. Every time we have one of these conversations, we're speaking with leaders across all verticals and industries, diving into topics that will prepare and equip cybersecurity leaders by extracting the hard-earned lessons from the years of experience each of our guests bring to the show. Today, we have two guests from the education industry, which is a first for us, a CISO and a CIO. And we're going to talk about a subject that I've heard discussed and debated for a long time, the CISO reporting to the CIO. Now, we're not going to discuss whether or not this is the right reporting structure or not, because there are a ton of opinions and factors that go into it. Not only that, there are hundreds of posts and articles about the subject if you want to hear what the experts think. The reality is, though reporting structures have changed in many organizations, the more common role CISOs report to is constantly the CIO. There are a ton of surveys available on the internet to support this as well. So given that's the current state of the industry, we're going to talk about how two leaders have taken this dynamic and found success. And hopefully we can gain some transferable wisdom that you can take back to your workplaces or your next leadership opportunity. So please welcome me and please join me in welcoming Becky Vasquez and David Mashburn to the show. David, Becky, welcome to the show. If you don't mind, would you share a little bit about your role and some of your past experiences with the audience?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. It's a great conversation. Information security is just a big part of what I do as CIO. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today and appreciate the opportunity to do so. So yeah, I've been with Embry-Riddle for most of my professional career. I've been in various technology leadership positions with Embry-Riddle for over 20 years. My current role as CIO for the university. I've been in place for about 7 years now. And prior to that was the chief technology officer for our worldwide campus. Embry-Riddle is pretty unique in the sense that we've got two residential campuses. Our worldwide campus, we have a presence internationally in the Asia region in Singapore. So it's a global organization and really unique in the sense that we were born out of aviation and aerospace, which is a significant safety culture too. So it's a complementary situation for both David and myself. But it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you. And I'll just turn it over to David for a quick intro as well.
Thank you, Becky.
Great, thank you. So my name is David Mashburn. As Becky indicated, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Embry-Riddle. Unlike Becky, I'm relatively new to this role. So I joined Embry-Riddle in June 2021. And so I've been here, I guess we're coming up about 16 months or so. Prior to that, I worked in incident response at Salesforce. And prior to that, I was in a nonprofit role as a security lead for many, many years. Also had experience in the federal sector and the civilian side of things, done some contracting and some consulting and some teaching. So kind of a varied background, but most of my background really started in traditional IT and eventually morphed over into that interest in security. And that's where I've been focused for the last 10 to 12 years.
And I think David and I both actually started our careers in the help desk. Is that right, David? You started at the help desk too, right?
That's correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great place to start.
Yes, it is.
That's awesome. You know, when I wanted to have this conversation, I reached out to Becky first as a CIO. Little did I know that a fellow SANS instructor and author would be the CISO that we get to have this conversation with. I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, no, it was kind of funny. As I was joking with Becky earlier because you had asked for a quick bio from us, and I was like, "Well, here you can find my bio on the SANS website." So that was a little bit amusing there to share that back with you.
I think that's where actually, David, did you see this job opportunity through SANS? Was that where it was?
Yeah, actually, it was posted to the advisory board mailing list, which is where I first saw this job come across.
So look at that, full circle.
Once again, advertising for SANS organically and not intentionally.
Right.
Becky, you're also the second CIO we've had on the show, so you are in rare air. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Nice.
Thank you for taking the time to join our show and help future leaders in cyber.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's such an important area and one I'm fascinated with and continue to learn into, especially from people like David.
All right, let's jump right on in. So a little bit of background on me. In my days in professional services, Big Four consulting, and now as a leader in industry, with my own eyes, I've seen the CISO report to the CEO, the CFO, the COO, Chief Risk Officer, the CIO, of course. I've seen them report to the CISO, which is different from CISO, and they encompass all aspects of security, including physical.
Yeah.
I've personally reported to the Chief Legal Officer. I've seen CISOs report to the CTO. Of course, many CISOs are reporting to the board, which is usually a combination of other reporting structures. I've seen it personally report to the Chief Digital Officer, which is a new role. I haven't actually been part of that, but I have seen that new one. And it's not uncommon for CISOs to report to the head of engineering in small startups. I've literally seen it all. And a lot of these also have dotted line relationships to multiple roles. So as a background, there are pretty much any role with a C on it, a CISO has probably potentially reported to, other than maybe marketing, even though one can make an argument for that as well. So every organization has their reasons for choosing their reporting structure. What is your exact reporting structure, and why did you guys choose for it to be that way?
Sure. I'll start with that one. So I myself report to our Chief Operational Officer and Senior Vice President. And then David is a direct report of mine, but he's also a dotted line to the Chief Operational Officer. So in that relationship, I'll kind of describe that and then the whys behind it. So, David and I tag team on the daily stuff. Really, information security from day to day is under his purview. And then we report very strategically up through the CIO and also through our board of trustees, who's our overarching governing body for the university. So that's really in tandem with the criticality and the visibility of information security and cybersecurity for the university is what's driving that. So we keep those conversations and those briefings very strategic. We gain input at a very strategic level from that group. So their understanding of the relevance of where we are as an institution, our maturity level with cybersecurity, and then also the direction and where we need to go as a university to keep us as safe and secure as possible is, how we work with that group of people. And they're very supportive and they're very interested, which is fabulous. So it's been great. They have, if we really need to move the needle on something, we know that we have a good, strong bench strength to tap into with both our Chief Operational Officer and then also, the Board of Trustees and the other senior leaders at the university. And then, the reasons why. So when I started as CIO, the position was at a director level, and then quickly realized, one of the first questions I was asked, I went to the Board of Trustees meeting and they said, "Hey, are we secure?" And I was like, wow, that's a loaded question, isn't it?
The dreaded question.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a dicey one and a tricky one. So you really want to, it's about confidence, building confidence, and the understanding that yes, things can happen. One, we're going to protect the university as much as possible, and here's all the layers of ways we're doing that, the layered approach that we have in place. Two, if something does happen, we're going to react very quickly, and this is how we're going to respond to an incident. So I think in understanding those approaches is how we build the confidence. So knowing of the importance, and as we're evolving as an IT organization, as the university evolves, it was like, okay, we also need to evolve this role and the importance of it. So it went to executive director, and then it went to Chief Information Security Officer. And that was really in tandem with the CEO, Rodney, myself, and the president and others at the university. So great evolution, and I think a really signifies the maturity of what we're doing at Embry-Riddle.
Thank you for that. And you kind of alluded to David having a dotted line responsibility to the COO. When and how is that dotted line relationship actually exercised?
Yeah, and I don't know, Dave, if you want to speak to that, but that really goes to the strategic aspect of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, like Becky said, it's usually more strategic in nature. It's not, hey, I'm tasking you to do these things on a daily basis. Although, occasionally that's something that may come with its high priority. We'd like some eyes on this, what security's weighing in on this. But generally, it's more along the lines of, what are we doing big picture? This is something that may have been seen in the press, for example, and they want to make sure that we're on top of it. Generally, we try to proactively communicate those things up. One of the examples we had the LastPass breach. Becky said, "Hey, we should produce some communication for our core leadership team," and so we put together a briefing for them to understand impact on the university and kind of push that up. So in terms of that relationship, largely it is, me passing information up, usually through Becky, to that core group, or them coming and say, "Hey, this is something. Have you thought of this?" Kind of looking big picture for things that are related to university initiatives.
Yeah,
So it sounds like, oh, go ahead, Becky.
No, good. I was going to say too, we do actually schedule quarterly briefings that are just very focused on, they're only about information security at the university. And then, if there's things going on in the world as well, we'll bring those forward. And that started with the COO, and now it's expanded. So David and I will also meet with the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, and then also the university president. So the three of them are engaged in that conversation. And then the CEO will always give us kind of pointers as far as, hey, next time, let's make sure we talk about this, or we'd like to get more information on this. So he'll provide those, I think, nuggets of wisdom along the way, if relevant.
Okay. All right. So one of the arguments around CISOs reporting CIOs is this perceived tension because of conflicting priorities between the two roles. And after having conversations with you two, I know that that's not the case with you. So maybe you can share, what does a typical interaction between you two look like?
Sure. So I'll take this one, Becky. So I think it can be a lot of different types of interaction. I mean, because we have instant communications, if there's something that needs, it could just be as simple as a Teams message, and we get a message there. We, hash out whatever is needed and go from there. In other cases, it may be a little more formal. We have scheduled meetings. We have our regular, one-on-one type meetings where we discuss topics that we each bring to the table that are things that either could be operational in nature or could be strategic in nature, or, planning for, say, the next Board of Trustees presentation. It really depends on what's happening at that time. But generally, I'd say it's pretty much bottom line. Becky has a lot of demands on her time. I have demands on my time. So usually it's very matter of fact, bottom line, cut to the chase, and then we're all both running to the next thing. And Becky, I kind of let you fill in anything I may have missed there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think really the approach is, in general, David and I are colleagues. And that's how I look at, all my direct reports and the leadership team. It isn't just, oh, that's my direct report. It really is, these are my colleagues. These are my peers who I'm fortunate enough to collaborate with. And, it works out. It's a very complementary dynamic between the two of us.
Yeah. And I think some of that, I'd say, it kind of goes back to just looking at the interview process, because certainly, as you do as any job seeker, you are being interviewed by where you're hiring, but also you're kind of interviewing where you're going as well to say, does this fit my outlook? And one of the things that was attractive to me was the environment. And I felt like, as Becky mentioned, it's very, very collaborative. We do work closely together on things, also work with my peers who are all Becky's other direct reports. And that's really one of the focus areas is communication, trying to make sure we're working on common goals. And also kind of the vision too is, Becky has a vision being very customer oriented, focused on the service delivery. And that's something that we buy into, or at least I know I buy into it, because the whole idea is we want to make security help the university achieve its goals. And so I think that's, part of it is, our visions aligned. It's very easy to buy in. It makes communication very comfortable because we're heading in the same direction.
I like that. And it makes me wonder from a day-to-day perspective, right? And I'm trying to, in many cases, break stereotypes and outside perceptions. Once again, I was a CISO that reported to a CIO. I reported to multiple different roles, and I've seen it work, and you guys seem to have made it work. When you need to get something done within IT, do you have the autonomy to go directly to an engineering team or directly to the networking team, or do you have to ask your boss first before you're going to contact them? What does something like that look like?
I mean, generally, as a courtesy, I will say, hey, Becky, by the way, this is what I'm thinking. This is where I'm going, but this is the plan. So I would say it's more, I'm trying to focus on staying informed, because I think it's really anything that happens. Like if there's something where I have to go, it's either going to be, related to incident response or some vulnerability we're having to address in a rapid fashion. So again, those are things that we really wouldn't conflict over. And we try, as I say, one of my goals in general, as someone who has to manage up and manage down, is no surprises, right? So if there's something brewing, some change we want to make, I want to have actually already discussed that before we actually go to it. And so some of it, I think, is just that courtesy of saying, there's no surprises to her. So if I have to go somewhere and ask for it, there's a good chance she probably already knows about it.
So in the RACI model, Becky, sometimes you're the I, sometimes you're the C, things like that, right?
Right.
That makes complete sense. So another area of contention is how funds are allocated, right? Neither of you can be successful without a budget aligned to your needs for both keep the lights on as well as projects and innovation. Given the CISO is under you, Becky, how is the CISO budget determined? Is it a subset of IT's allotment? Is it based on David's request and strategic plan, or is there a different construct in place?
Yes, so we have an operational budget in place for David's area, information security, each team. So infrastructure's got their budget, IT services, David's got his budget. And then year over year, there's going to be rollover of funds, especially when things like contracts are in place, right? We want to, continue on with these various initiatives we have in place that are under David's budget. So they'll continue, and same thing with the staffing. So where it gets unique is when we go through strategic planning. We've got a couple different ways. So one, if let's say he wants to expand, which he's done, expanded licensing for training and awareness, right? So he'll submit that in our normal operational budget increase, perhaps. And then if he wants to do something brand new, for example, he had an endpoint detection and response, endpoint protection type of initiative last year, he'll submit that initiative, and then that will be evaluated with all the other initiatives we have. So here's the difference for us, and I'm sure other organizations do this as well. Because of the strategic priority of information security, and everything in IT is a priority. It's not to say that one thing's more important than the other, but information security does go hand in hand with risk management and how we handle risk. So it's a pretty big bullseye in the sense of what we need to consider. We always prioritize information security initiatives over others. And really what will happen too is we'll sit down with the chief operational officer before we do the proper vetting of all our strategic initiatives and say, hey, David's got these 3 things he wants to do. Here's the total amount of funding. Here's our total budget for new strategic initiatives. So far, they're betting 1,000. The answer has been yes, 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 and yes. And a big reason is because David and team are thoughtful in their request, and they're reasonable. So they're not asking for 10 new things that aren't even, possible for us to do. They're reasonable with their approach. And they're like, this is what we want to do. This is the objective. These are the potential outcomes, and this is why. And when you're reasonable, we have reasonable leaders, and then things can happen with that. So we definitely prioritize it, and it's worked out well for us.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of reiterate that, I think part of it is, the budget process has been very supportive for us. As Becky mentioned, we've gone with a couple asks and we've gotten those approved. It's been amazing. But I do think that part of it is we try to be very thoughtful about that, because, Becky and I put together, there was an existing information security plan that was here when I got here. We looked at it, made some tweaks, and these things, we kind of make sure our asks kind of align with those plans. And of course, giving ourselves some flexibility to adjust, but we're also trying to make sure that we're fully utilizing the resources we have, right? I don't want to go out and ask for something else that when maybe I've got another system that could do most of what I want, and maybe I'm only using a third of that, for example. And so we try to be very particular about saying there's a gap here that needs to be filled, and that really reflects our new budget. And the rest of it maybe I need to reallocate some of my training budget to make sure we're actually using these other systems as effectively as we should. So, I think it's trying to position ourselves for success, to understand that, yes, if we keep our ask reasonable, we're more likely to get the things that we need.
Right. One of well, I think I told you we had a CIO on, and one of the things that she would say is, don't be a chicken little CISO, right? You can't act like the sky is falling all the time,
Right.
because eventually no one's going to care, right?
Right.
So taking a more pragmatic approach, a risk-based approach, makes a lot of sense. That makes sense from a strategic perspective, but part of security's role is, as IT is rolling out projects, deploying new technologies and applications, security has to review them. Security has to make recommendations, and sometimes those recommendations come at a cost. We have to buy more licenses, or we need to pay for a pen test service, or the list kind of goes on and on. Those are unplanned budget requests typically. How are those kind of budget requests approved?
Mm-hmm. We do have a process for that as well. So I'll kick this one off, David, and then feel free to add in. So we've got a few different budget managers within the IT spectrum. Ideally they all come under me. So I do have full visibility of all the budgets, but quarterly throughout the fiscal year, we get together to review. We look at where we projected our budgets to be at that time of year compared to actuals. So always projected to actuals. Are we trending ahead? Are we trending behind? If we're trending behind, it's hard with some of these contracts, right? So we think like it's going to start here, but then it doesn't start until 6 months later. So you've got half a fiscal year that you need to consider or can consider for maybe allocating to a one-time operational expense somewhere. So we really collaborate and identify, okay, yes, I think I'm going to have some budget available, and then we'll reallocate that to unknown or surprise expenses.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the contractor game, or even just the contract project game. We planned on starting in January. We had $100,000 allocated every month. We ended up starting in March, so we actually have $200,000 we didn't plan on spending. That game happens all the time. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Yeah, and just to follow, that's given I have a limited window here. Really, I've only kind of came at the end of one fiscal year and been through one full fiscal budget cycle. For me, it's really about we see these opportunities. Hey, there's budget monies available. The challenge is, okay, that solves the problem this fiscal year, but what about the out years if I'm going to subscribe to something? And so that's something I'm still navigating myself about, okay, well, what's the best way to approach this? Is it I'll take the money this year and then put in maybe a request for budget that I hope to be approved, but then you're kind of taking that risk that, okay, I'm going to have to take something from somewhere else that following year if my budget is not approved, or I'm going back to my peers and saying, hey, who's not spending money this quarter? Which is
you really need to buy that this year.
Right. Yes.
Right. I will say too, David and his team do a great job in investing in professional development and certifications. Do you know how many certifications your team has at this point? It's always impressed me. I mean, it's been
I think Sean, who's one of our senior engineers, I think he has 11 SAN certs, so he's very deeply invested in that.
Yeah.
So we've got everyone else has I think a minimum of 3 or 4, so it's a pretty impressive number.
Right.
In there, we try to make sure, well, we don't try to, we do make sure they get at least a class a year. And in some cases we can do more depending on how we stretch the budget there. And sometimes they're, kind of vendor neutral, like SANS offers. Sometimes they're product specific. Hey, we want to really leverage this product we have deployed and get the most out of that. So instead of going and asking for another shiny toy, hey, let's figure out how to make this do everything it can. So.
That's awesome. I mean, number one, it keeps your people happy. It keeps them engaged, and it really helps when it comes to attrition. And not only that, the more trained and better equipped your team is, the more you can do with less. So I like that approach. So as we're talking about, potential conflicting priorities, CIOs are notoriously focused on uptime or servicing the organization or the educational institution. And maybe we can call that the A in the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability.
Yep.
And CISOs are typically more focused on confidentiality and integrity. We have disaster recovery and so forth, depending on, which organization or business continuity. That being said, depending on the scenario, you may find yourself in a position where one or two take precedence over the other, meaning we have to get this pushed out by this time, their expectations, but, security may slow things down. Or Security wants to do one thing, but it potentially compromises availability.
Right.
How are those risk decisions made, and how do you handle a stalemate if there is one?
Mm-hmm.
So I think generally, again, this kind of goes back to the fact that we do a lot of long-term planning, a lot of strategic planning about where we want to be. And so typically we try to have those priorities aligned. But if, say we come up with a project and something pops up and there's a security decision that needs to be made. Ultimately, I think, from my perspective is security has to enable the business, because if I'm not enabling things to happen, then people are going to see us as a barrier. And what we want is partnerships, not just within IT, but also within our user community. And so I want the faculty and the students and the staff to know that when they come to security with something, that we're here to help solve problems, and we're here to help to keep the university safe. But that problem solving part of it is a big part. And I think sometimes, I've seen cultures where they don't really care about the problem. All they care about is the security part. And I think if you can help identify the problem, you can be part of the solution, and you can steer it towards something that everybody can live with. Now, typically, I think my mindset itself is much more along the lines of, let's find a way to make it work as securely as we can. And let's understand the risk and be realistic about the risk. And then I'll let the leadership team make the decision about what the acceptable risk is.
Right.
I am an advisory role. I am not in the role. My goal is not to be the one who has to say no. My goal is to say, here's your choices. You can pick. Here's the consequence of your choices, but it's your decision.
I love that. I tell all my teams, you're not allowed to say no. It's always yes if.
Right.
Yes,
Or
we can do it if you put in this control, if you pay this money, if you hire these people, if you accept this risk, right? There's always a yes. It's just up to you to decide how we're getting to that yes. And here are your options.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think if I could just finish one thought here, if the other thing you run into is in many organizations, right? Customers come to you with a solution versus a problem, right? And so what we're trying to do is find ways to engage them as early as we can, or to go back when they come say, hey, we want this product. Well, we kind of look at it and say, what is this? And we may not like the security profile. And then it's kind of peeling the layer back and saying, what problem is it that you're trying to solve? Like, what can we help you do from a business perspective? And then maybe that's where we're engaging other parts of the IT organization, or architects or our services team, to help drive them to something that we already know and accept that risk for.
Right. Yeah. David, I was smiling when you were talking, because I really appreciate your approach when it comes to the stance of a request. And a lot of IT professionals have that dilemma, or have had to figure out how to evolve past the no answer. Starting with no, a lot of them want to start with no and work their way to yes, where I prefer we start with yes and work our way to no if we have to. I used to have this kind of the joke, the motto of the place to go when you want to be told no, from an IT organization. I think that's kind of like the old school approach. And it's tough, right? Because IT security and audits and risk and everything that goes with it, a lot of it is about controls. And then so people equate that to controlling. But it is a shared responsibility. And one of the reasons why we made this offer to David, and he's in this role, is because of the emphasis he put on effective communication and collaboration. IT security doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be something that's people can really embrace it and understand it and work with us. The value that people, by us putting more focus on user awareness and helping people understand their role in cybersecurity as an employee or a student at Embry-Riddle, has helped them also in their personal lives. We've heard that, over and over again. Oh, I shared these things that I learned about cybersecurity with my relatives and friends of mine, and somebody was scammed and I was able to tell them what to do. So, that approach is so relevant. And I think, just generally speaking, we certainly are not identical, but very complementary. And I think that's been the key, is that our mission, vision, and values professionally and with the organization are super complementary, and that helps us. I don't recall a time really where we had a stalemate, right? Like where we couldn't figure out, how do we navigate this? What do we do?
No, I would agree with that. I mean, I think generally when there have been times we come in and didn't know the solution at first, and we talked about it and figured out something, and we said, yeah, that makes sense. But in terms of like a real diametrically opposed thing, no, not that I can think of offhand.
You make a good point. When I've seen the CISO-CIO relationship be contentious, there were character mismatches.
Mhm.
And so from a value, mission, and what you hold dear, when you're aligned in that regard, you're going to figure it out at the end of the day. I can really appreciate that. So my last question, this is for each one of you guys. There will be a CISO that moves into a role under a CIO. Maybe there's even a CIO listening that is trying to figure out how to deal with his CISO, right? Or her CISO. What advice would you give to a CISO? And I'm gonna ask you, Becky, from a CIO perspective. But what advice would you give to a CISO that does have to report to a CIO to make it a effective and productive relationship?
Mhm. Well, David, do you want to start that one?
Sure, I'll be happy to take a stab at it
Okay,
first.
go ahead. You start.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because I think even during the interview process, Becky mentioned a couple of books, like that was the Seamless Customer. I'm butchering the
Effortless,
title.
yeah.
Effortless, right?
experience. Mhm.
The Effortless experience, and a couple of things that really, she said, embodied kind of the philosophy of how she wants to operate. And I think again, as coming in as an applicant, as a candidate, you have to understand the culture and does it align with what you want. And it aligned with my mindset. I said, okay, I like that approach. I want to be an enabler of business. And maybe it's my background, maybe coming from that help desk beginning and working in various facets of IT where it was always about making sure things worked, right? And then when I got into other security roles, I find myself at times, and you can argue this is good or bad, doing things that were not necessarily strictly security related, but like, hey, something's going on. Maybe it's a security issue. So you're on a phone figuring it out and you solve the problem, and maybe it's not a security issue. It's not a firewall. It's not whatever, but ultimately you've helped solve a problem. Right.
Yep.
And so that problem solving mindset, I think, is kind of what I like to bring to the security team, and saying, everything we deal with is an issue, right? We can look at everything and say it's all scary and just no, don't do it, lock it off, and then no one will listen to you and no one will work with you. Or you can work on solving problems and understanding that your customers, your constituents, your users, whatever you want to call them, have goals that they need to meet, that so they can do their job. How am I enabling them to do their job while still bringing that level of risk down to an acceptable level? It's never going to be zero, but I think that's really, as a CISO in any reporting structure. If I was reporting to our legal counsel or to our CFO, and I've been in reporting structures where I had those types of reporting structures, it's ultimately the goal of the business is the business. Security does not exist for itself. And for a CISO who wants to really understand that, I will think one of the things that was very eye-opening for me was to get involved in seeing enterprise risk. So somewhere within your organization, there's someone who's handling overall risk. And so when you go there and you look at that world and realize, hey, cyber is just a slice of that, right? Now it's my slice and it's important to me, but maybe there are existential risks. Like, by the way, if we don't handle this risk, we're going to be out of business. That's a little bit more important. And that's eye-opening to help keep perspective. And so you have to understand that as a CISO, sometimes your view needs to be more expansive to understand the requirements that your CIO has or that your senior leadership has, whatever your reporting structure is. And so that's broad. And I think that's one reason that Becky and I, not only we align, but also have an appreciation for what she has to deal with that I don't have to deal with on a daily basis.
I think I love that. I mean, there was so much that you said there. The first part of it was a short master class in how to be a good CISO, no matter what your reporting structure is. Add value to your organization, and whoever your leader is going to empower you to continue doing that, right? And at the end, the enterprise risk, cyber risk, strategic risk, operational risk, technical risk, which is different from cyber risk. I mean, there's all the different risks that are out there. We are just one of them. Now, recent studies have shown that we're kind of ranked in the top 5, top 3, top 2, depending where you are, top 1.
Yes.
But we're amongst many others. And we kind of have to make sure that we understand there is a spectrum, and decisions need to be made with all of those being balanced. Ultimately, all business is managing different risks.
Mm-hmm.
Cyber has just thrown his hat on the table and said, include me too,
Right.
pretty much.
Yeah,
Becky.
what about me? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that was so well said, David. Truly, I really appreciate what you said about business, being a business enabler. Technology at its core, that's really what I think the power of technology is. It just touches every single aspect. And then really, information security is touching every aspect. It's layered in there. It's such a complementary relationship between the two. So it really is the ultimate enabler. So I think for any leader, David talked about the reporting lines. I would tell any aspiring leader in technology I would give them this guidance. One is, sharp technical skills and understanding various fields and aspects of technology is very important, but equally important are the soft skills. A lot of people kind of put that to the background, but to be able to spend some professional development, evolve those skills, put some practice in with those skills. If it's presenting, maybe focusing on that. If it's just communicating effectively to get buy-in on something around that. It is a true pleasure. I do not have to convince David around the criticality of communication. And I've had to do that various times in my career, and to not have to convince him why it's so important is wonderful. So it is, if you can get the impact and the importance and the ways to really be an effective communicator, it's a significant win, I think. And then, on the flip side, it is understanding what's important to the organization. What are the strategic goals? What does student retention mean to Embry-Riddle, and why is it important, and what does it play? So if we frustrate students because we have something in place to support information security, we may inadvertently affect student success and retention. We don't want to do that. So they always have to be complementary in some way, shape, or form. And then I would say, lastly, is to understand, David has a good grasp on the CIO world. It can be, I could be talking about server retirement, and then a new cloud tech solution. And then we've got the disaster recovery test, we've got a test. So it's all over the place, understanding that, and then also how to help shape, form all of those agendas as being, a substantial leader for the organization, and understanding that role, the significance of it, and how it can be complementary to the CIO, I think is a nice sweet spot.
Thank you for that, Becky. Heads up, our producer, Stephen Hart, who doesn't get enough credit for all the things that he produces, I'm going to ask him to take a snippet of the first part of your answer and make that the commercial for our show, because that's exactly what this show is about. It's about the soft skills. We say technical skills are important. Sure, you need to know that. But the soft skills are what are going to keep you in the room. Soft skills are going to earn you influence. And you laid out a perfect set of reasons for that. So thank you for that. And once again, it's literally why we exist. It was the first part of your answer. Actually, the first two parts of your answer. All right. So my favorite part of the show, I ask technical people like you guys to give analogies or metaphors or stories or ways that you can communicate those technical topics to non-technical audiences. I'm curious if any of you have one that you'd like to share.
So I'll take a stab at that, because that's often, what I get called on to do is say, okay, let's translate something. Say we're going to make a presentation to the audit committee for the board of trustees. Yep. So again, in no way this is diminishing what people know in their domains, but no person is a master of all domains. So we're lucky because we do have some pretty good physical analogies. So Becky mentioned earlier culture of safety because of flight. And so, Embry-Riddle being renowned for its flight programs. And so there is a large culture of flight safety. And so typically when I'm trying to make an analogy, it typically will be a physical analogy that may try to involve something around things they have familiarity with regarding safety of flight. And I think that's pretty effective in that particular audience. In other audiences, it might be some other mod. Typically, though, I find that physical models, because that's usually one more universal experience, tend to help people at least put something together that's good enough for an understanding. It doesn't have to be perfect. All it has to say is, can I slot this into whatever risk thing I have, and then move on to the next agenda item and make the decision that needs to be made here in this case. So
that's awesome. I love the physical analogies are probably the most common because they're the easiest. People understand them. They experience them on a regular basis. But I like that you paired it with specifically the organization and talking about flight and flight safety. Because you could have easily just talked about safety and it still would have landed. But flight safety, it's a little bit more visceral because it's tied directly to your organization. That's a tip I'm going to take in the future. You know, if you're a CISO in a hospital, talk about physical viruses and how they compare to actual digital viruses. People are going to understand and be able to correlate that a little bit better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Oh, sure.
Not to put you on the spot, Becky.
Yeah, it does a little, right? No, you're right, David. The building analogy and the airplane analogies have worked well for us with, like, especially the strategic requests that we have. But, well, one that I have used, it actually goes back to the initial question or the intro. I think I said something about, you know, the board of trustees asked me. It was a very generic question, like my first update as CIO, are we secure? And I'm like, you know, how do you answer that? So I think it goes to, you know, I'm in Central Florida, close to the coast, spend a lot of time by the ocean. When you go to the beach, if you get in the water, especially where I live near New Smyrna Beach, shark bite capital of the world, guess what? You could get bit by a shark. Anytime you're connected to the internet, there is some risk that you could be hacked. There's things you can do to make sure you don't swim near the pier. If people are fishing, you don't go swim next to them. If you see a family of sharks by the beach, you don't go swimming by them. You know, there's various things you do to keep yourself safe. There's a lot of unknowns out there. It's a bit of a stretch of an analogy, but I'm like, you know, kind of, I think collectively the world has gotten past the place of understanding where, okay, there is not a guarantee. David and I cannot sit here and say 100% will guarantee you that we'll never be hacked. That guarantee is not a realistic thing to say as long as we've got connections and we're connected together. So I think just, you know, things like that, understanding, okay, yeah, we're taking risk. It's a part of risk management. What is your risk tolerance? And what are those layers of protection we can put in place to, you know, minimize maybe something potentially bad happening? So at the end of the day, you know, our role really is significantly to be technology translators. I call it biznologists. We have to understand the business of Embry-Riddle and the technology, and then talk about it in a way that translates for any audience.
I think that is the perfect ending to our show. David, Becky, thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for showing that a CIO and a CISO can work together, complement each other, be happy with each other. This does not have to be a contentious relationship. It can be successful. It's just a matter of who are sitting in both of those seats. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We appreciate it. Take care.